Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining me to walk through Gundersen Health's accelerated journey to better risk management. We want to make this interactive, so please do utilize the Q&A panel and ask questions along the way. We want to make sure you get your questions answered and, again, make this exciting. We do have an action-packed agenda. We're going to start off with an overview of vendor risk management and then go through Gundersen Health's risk journey. We're going to talk a little bit about operational resiliency and then show you all what it looks like in a live demo. And then we're going to wrap it up with where Gundersen Health is going next. My name is Teresa Law. I am your moderator for today. I've been with ServiceNow for a little over 4 years. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Risk. Although I do have over 20 years in the security and risk industry with some of the largest companies in the market. I am joined here today, and very excited to be joined here today, by Linda Soybert. Linda has worked at Gundersen Health for over 30 years in various roles in information technology, and is currently the Director of Information Security at Gundersen Health System located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Linda manages a team of 7 individuals that make up a security operations team, as well as disaster recovery, identity and access management, and oversight of Gundersen's facilities and medical device security programs. In 2019, Linda provided executive oversight and project sponsorship for ServiceNow for IT service management, IT operations management, and IT business management. Gundersen recently implemented vendor risk management for both security risk assessments and technical architecture assessments for all third-party vendors as part of their maturity roadmap to improve their information and compliance management program. I'm also joined by David. David Decker co-leads the ServiceNow practice at consultancy Edgile, a ServiceNow Elite partner. David's been serving clients for over 20 years, helping them achieve operational efficiencies while improving quality and completeness with their integrated risk management programs, supporting ERM, operational risk management and IT risk management, vendor risk management, business continuity, and security operations. He has deep industry expertise in financial services, healthcare, government, and manufacturing. And then to do our demo today, I'm joined by Gordon Hazard. He's a senior architect in the ServiceNow practice at Edgile, working with David. Gordon has led teams and implementations for over 7 years, and he was a lead architect supporting Gundersen Health's vendor risk management deployment. He's also implemented ServiceNow to support ERM, operational risk, IT risk, business continuity, vendor for a variety of industries, including financial services, healthcare, government, retail, and technology. I'd like to set the stage and talk a little bit about something that highly differentiates ServiceNow from other solutions, and that's the ServiceNow platform. I like this illustration because you can see all the different products that have been built on the ServiceNow platform and take advantage of things like the common data model. Now, what that means for risk is that we're able to see all the data within the platform and within the built-in CMDB, which also is unique for ServiceNow. That means that whatever information the IT service management, the customer service management, HR, security applications might be bringing into the platform or have access to, vendor risk management has access to, as does the rest of GRC, which allows us to track compliance and risk literally across the enterprise. Specifically today, I want to talk a little bit about the integrated risk management solutions. Now, we have a portfolio of solutions, again, built on the Now platform, taking advantage of the automated workflows, the CMDB, system of intelligence, notifications, knowledge base, the scalability that you'll get from the cloud platforms, and then, of course, the single database is something that IRM takes advantage of, just like the rest of the ServiceNow platform. In IRM, we have policy and compliance. So we're able to manage your governance, so you can build a governance framework and then manage it through our compliance product to ensure compliance to a variety of regulations across industries. Our risk management application associates risk with those controls that have been created through compliance so that we can track risk holistically, be able to identify what you should work on first, and then business continuity, which is one of our newer applications, to be able to manage the worst case scenarios. We'll skip vendor risk for the moment. Our audit management application takes advantage of the risk management data to be able to identify where we should start those audits first. And then it takes advantage of the compliance information and evidence that's collected through that compliance process to be able to streamline the audits, particularly for our auditors. We use our application at ServiceNow, and when we bring in our external auditors, we give them access to our instance, and they're able to see all the evidence collected throughout the year or throughout that period within the instance. And they're also able to schedule walkthroughs or questions with any stakeholders that they need to talk to. That allows our internal audit team to focus on the exceptions, and it saves them tremendous amounts of time and money. Privacy is a new application we're coming out with later this year. Again, managing privacy risk and compliance is still very critical to a lot of our customers. And then, as we just talked about, we're able to integrate and share data across all the other applications on the platform. Now, speaking specifically about vendor risk management, this is an application that's extremely popular recently, especially as we've discovered throughout the last year, where organizations have issues with supply chains. Vendor risk management allows organizations to be able to assess their vendors, the risk they pose to their organizations, and really ultimately plan and continuously monitor as changes occur so they can take action as quickly as possible. So I do want to get on to speaking a little bit about what Gundersen Health's journey is, but before we do that, I want to take a little survey and find out from all of you listening to us today, how mature is your vendor risk and resilience program? So please select one of these options. We have none, which is honestly what we find with a lot of customers, that people are just now starting to investigate this and seeing this as something that's really critical to the risk posture of their organization. Second option, we use spreadsheets and email to assess risk. Again, another very common option for our customers. We use spreadsheets and emails to assess risk and resilience. So looking at that worst case scenario, are you ready for a crisis? Are you able to recover as quickly as possible? Fourth option, we have a formal program with commercial software to assess risk. That could be you already have our vendor risk application, or you have another risk application, or maybe you have created your own risk application. But you have at least formalized that for risk, and then for risk and resilience. And then finally, very mature organizations, we use controls to continuously monitor vendor risk and internal business risk as part of an integrated program. So I see we've got a few people that have responded to this. Please take a moment to just select what best fits your organization. And then we will take a look at the responses. Yeah, it's actually wonderful to see that the people are using tools, even if it is spreadsheets and email, to be able to assess risk and resilience. Because as we have discovered in the last year, that is so critically important to the success of an organization. And it's also very heartening to see that a lot of people have a formal program in place, and even that we have some folks that have implemented an integrated program. So great. This is actually very interesting, and I think it'll be helpful for our speakers as we go forward. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Linda, who is going to walk you through their journey at Gundersen Health. Linda, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to join the call today. So Gundersen Health, we're located in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and we're one of the region's tri-state leaders in healthcare. We have a 325-bed main campus facility along with 6 affiliate critical care hospitals and over 62 to 65 regional clinics. clinic locations. We went live with ServiceNow for IT service management, operations management, and business management first quarter of 2019. And during that implementation, I had taken a look at the governance, risk, and compliance module of ServiceNow, very interested, and budgeted for the vendor risk management for implementation in 2020. David?
Thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
It's really been a great partnership working with you and your team, and I think this webinar is a great opportunity to share that journey and your success. And as I reflect back on our initial meeting, we discussed Gundersen's needs as well as their options, and ultimately we landed on Edgile's Quick Start as the right approach. And so in terms of what this Quick Start really entails, Edgile has built a Quick Start build of vendor risk management. Along with that build, we have predefined requirements documents that include business, functional, and technical requirements, along with a corresponding user acceptance test plan. We then have a decision tracker that helps facilitate our clients through the journey. In this case, for vendor risk, we have roughly 34 key decisions that are made. And we find that if we're moving outside of those 34 key decisions, then we're likely moving into customization and not simply configuration. On that note, the Quick Start includes the configuration with the tuning from our specific clients. We then will facilitate user acceptance testing until it's defect-free, and then wrap up the project with 2 training sessions, one for an end user audience that would be responding to the inherent risk questionnaires coming out of ServiceNow Vendor Risk Management for the business to respond to, as well as Linda's team, who would be running the campaigns and working the vendor risk management process. Yes, please.
David,
Linda.
I was going to add to that we chose to implement ServiceNow's vendor risk management as the first step in our 5-step roadmap to improve our information risk and compliance management program. I think you'll remember those conversations on those initial calls. We found that the accelerated Quick Start partnership as an ideal program, because at the time I had a team of 2 individuals, and we knew that this was an important step to maturing our risk assessment process. And those 2 individuals had competing responsibilities. So the Quick Start program actually allowed my team to spend 1 or 2 hours per week providing the Edgile team guidance and oversight of the expected deliverables, testing the different configuration items in order for us to rapidly obtain a foundation for vendor risk assessments in early 2020. And if you'll recall, obviously we all remember, early 2020 is when the pandemic hit. And you would think that this would have been a project that would have gotten put on the back burner because of all of the extra effort that healthcare organizations were spending on ensuring that their organizations could stay financially feasible as well as see patients. But that did not, this project did not detract from that work because we had partnered with Edgile to do the 12-week Quick Start program.
Yes, and that was all delivered remotely. So I think that was one of our very first projects when we had all gone work from home.
Right.
Oops. Sorry. So a few highlights of the approach that we took Gundersen through is, from a build philosophy, we think of the world starting with reporting first. What are the hard questions that management and other stakeholders need answered? And let's make sure that we have the right reports, dashboards, relationships, and analytics to support that. The next tenet in our philosophy is rapid build and work and walkthroughs. We don't want any surprises. Our clients don't want any surprises. So we preview our builds early through the process so we can course correct and make any fine tuning, whether it's field layout or locations or additional buttons to help automate some of the tasks. From an organizational change management perspective, training and communication plans are vital. From a training perspective, we look to empower and enable our clients both from that management lens as well as the end user lens. Finally, as we look to automate what historically have been often manual processes with spreadsheets, email, we look to remove any friction from those processes and automate the workflow last as a part of the project to make sure that our clients will achieve the efficiency objectives that they're also seeking through these engagements. From an approach perspective on the bottom left of this slide, there's really three areas to highlight. The first is we're talking about configuration and not customization. In I'd say most cases, we're able to support our clients 100% with configuration activities using the native ServiceNow functionality. That was very much the case for Gundersen Health. There have been a few very large clients with mature processes where we will need to do some customization, but that's more the exception than the norm. The next is really building towards a minimum viable product. And for that, we're using predefined templates, configurations, and workflows that really harness the way ServiceNow is designed and architected. And finally, from an enablement perspective, we look to learn from our deep functional and technical experts around the best ways to implement and use the solution. There's a variety of ways and approaches that clients can take, and some have better results than others, and we can help guide our clients through some of those decision points. Finally, on this slide, I'd like to highlight the bottom right-hand side. What are some of the things that successful clients and successful implementations do, and what are some of the things to avoid? Well, the first thing is spending enough time up front to document the process and really understand the details around some of those decisions and requirements. Again, creating a reporting vision and understanding of the stakeholders and their needs. And then lastly, aiming for a minimum viable product. You want to get the product out and in the field and used, and then from there, plan subsequent enhancements. These clients that are successful avoid customization, and they understand that they're moving from a manual spreadsheet and email world to an automated workflow with lots of options to gain greater efficiency. And so they take a pause and really relook at their process. They also avoid developing complex processes with a lot of interdependencies from other teams. As it relates to vendor risk management, clearly procurement, the business, IT, architecture, legal, a variety of stakeholders are involved. We really look to satisfy one or two of those initial stakeholders and then subsequently layer in the other team's needs. I'd like to pause and see if Linda has anything to add on this slide before we move on and talk about the reporting first?
Thanks, David. No, I don't have anything to add on that particular slide.
Great, thank you. And so Linda will talk about some of the hard questions here.
Absolutely. So we had, there were several that the PowerPoint will share with you, hard questions that we really wanted to have answered in our vendor risk management, questions around services and products that vendors provide us, what kind of security safeguards are around those, which vendors should we not be working with, which vendors potentially have not met the security requirements and guidelines that we in healthcare need to follow. Helping us identify the high-risk vendors and ensuring that we have them identified on our risk registry so that we're ensuring that we're following up with them and understanding what the risks, how they are managing potential gaps or in their risk program. Which vendors have control gaps that we need them to require remediation. Just because a vendor does not necessarily meet full compliance does not mean in healthcare that we have the ability to just deny the use of that vendor or a contract with that vendor, but now we have a better way of tracking what kinds of gaps they may have that require remediation and can have an impact on that contract negotiation. We just needed a new and more consistent way to automate and complete vendor risk assessments in a more efficient and standardized process. I saw on the survey, many of you are using email and spreadsheets. That was the same for Gundersen prior to 2020. Our security architect, and as I remind you, I only had 2 individuals on my team, but that individual spent between 8 and 10 hours per vendor contract reviewing their at the time, their CAIQ risk assessment questionnaire that we would send to every vendor. And that was just a simple spreadsheet, much like many of you are using, that had no risk rating, no tiering, no intelligence to help weight the question and answers on the questionnaire. The vendor tiering and business inherent risk rating that we now use as part of vendor risk management helps automate whether a vendor will be required to complete the full SIG questionnaire, a light version, a core version, or maybe they don't even have to complete a questionnaire, but it's a standardized process that every vendor contract follows now since March of this year. For example, if a vendor doesn't answer a particular question, that's automatically called out for our information security analyst. She sees that immediately in the scoring assessment, and she can send that back to them and ask them to complete the questionnaire. It automatically gives us a risk rating. It removes any subjectivity. It provides us with workflow automation. So my team can help facilitate a much quicker completion of a security risk assessment in conjunction with any new vendor contracts, and it reduces my team's workload. Once completed, our analyst can now review that completed assessment, potentially identify gaps or remediation areas that we are going to suggest be put into the contract, and sends that back to the vendor via our questionnaire so it eliminates the email back and forth. In addition, now we have a risk registry because we have that database of all of our vendors, what their security risk assessment, the risk assessment artifacts that are required, for example, a SOC 2 report or questionnaires regarding medical device technology, as well as we are now able to set expiration dates for either an annual or a biannual review of those risk assessments as part of our information risk management program. Since our go live in March of 2021, we've now partnered with Edgile to complete an implementation of our technical architecture assessment and our business continuity management program.
You know, Linda, I think what you said is really interesting. I had not considered from the healthcare perspective that there are some vendors or applications that vendors offer that you don't get a choice to work with,
right.
That you really have to work with. So
right.
if they come back with responses, or if there's things you don't like, do you take advantage of the issue and task capabilities? And have you ever used the chat capabilities within the vendor risk application to be able to?
We have. Yes, and that's routinely used as part of the analyst review. If they have questions, they can simply send a chat in order to get a quick response to a particular question that maybe the vendor filled out and we weren't quite clear on what their response was. So yes, we've used that very much.
Yeah, I think that's so, and I think it's pretty unique. But I like the idea that you can get a quick response on things, so you're not sending an email, hoping that they see it, waiting for them to respond, getting that information back. I mean, just the amount of time it saves. I mean, I know I use Slack internally for my own, communications at work, and just be able to get that quick response back that you can get within vendor risk management, I think is just great. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are utilizing that capability. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Linda. That was a great description of the journey and how your team has been able to find success and value from the vendor risk solution. I'd like to spend just a minute here to talk about the big picture and specifically the concept of operations of how does vendor risk management really work within ServiceNow. There are 6 primary activities, if you will. The first is a vendor intake form where you're identifying either new vendors or new products or services that those vendors are providing. There's, in the second stage, an inherent risk questionnaire that is responded to by the business to frame what the confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirements really are around that service or product. As Linda pointed out, we can then automate the tiering and the scoring of that, and that would then trigger whether or not the fourth stage of a detailed self-assessment is performed using things like the SIG, SIG Core, SIG Lite, and so forth. So the fourth stage is the vendor self-assessment. From there, potential findings and remediation management comes out of that process, and it ends with vendor approval. So the client is then left with a solid understanding of both the inherent and the residual risk and any potential gaps or concerns. From a benefits perspective, I think clearly the speed and the ability to quickly analyze the responses, leverage the drill down and capabilities to add work notes related to open issues for the vendors, the ability to understand when upcoming vendor risk and tiering assessments are scheduled, when they're coming due, as well as stay informed of the status of things that perhaps have expired, are overdue tasks, or coming up and are critical for this process. To take a quick step back, why we're finding clients are really embarking on the vendor risk management journey is a real understanding that ultimately this is about improving operational resiliency. And so to Linda's point earlier, as we were in the throes of the pandemic, staying operationally available and being able to serve patients was really vital and an important objective of Gundersen Health. And so when we take a step back and really look at what are the characteristics of successful and resilient supply chains, these organizations understand that disruptions and supply chain dislocations are normal, and that life happens, events happen, and that they need to maintain strong supplier relationships, frequent communication, both with their suppliers as well as their teams that are very close to the action, and empower those teams to be able to take action and minimize the severity of an impact. These successful and resilient supply chain organizations also have, to the extent possible, standardized with interchangeable parts and facilities. And then lastly, they really try to run concurrent processes as opposed to sequential processes to minimize any work stoppage. And so as we look at these organizations, we ask ourselves, what's the one thing these organizations really needed? And it's putting their finger on the right data. And so where is the right data? It's not in just one place. And this really emphasizes the power of the ServiceNow platform for clients like Gundersen Health, where they'd already embarked on ITSM and the operations management and related solution sets. Those solutions have really a gold mine of data, and these different processes, whether it's vendor risk management at the top, or business continuity, or integrated risk, or even security operations for that matter, they're able to push data from the different modules, make that data available, pass the attributes, and make those associations to really empower organizations to have the right data points to allow them to make decisions and to minimize the impacts. And on that note, when we look at what happens without the right data, we really look at this from two dimensions. The firm's performance, how well the organization is able to operate and at what level they're performing. And then the other dimension is time. And what we have here on the dotted line is an event occurs, and there's an initial impact. And in this model, there's lengthy preparation for recovery. There's a deeper impact and impairment with a much slower recovery. And we're not able to get up to the same level of performance. We're very close, but there is a greater long-term impact. If we do have the right data, we're able to prepare for recovery much sooner, and we're able to lessen the impact. So this green line is really what we're seeking for, and we're able to minimize and materially reduce that long-term impact. And so we'd like to leave 5 tactical things with the audience today around how do you move that green line up and really improve the overall performance. So there's 5 tactical things. The first is really understanding what those critical business functions are, and we use business continuity for that. Incidentally, that is another piece of the roadmap and journey that Gundersen is on. They're deploying ServiceNow business continuity, which includes the disaster recovery. On the second point here, really identifying those suppliers that are supporting the critical business functions. Third, understanding the risk posture of these critical suppliers and staying in frequent communication with them when other, I'll say, external events occur, and understanding what their impact may be to that supply chain. And lastly, really understanding what the crown jewel assets are that have potentially exploitable weaknesses vis-a-vis vulnerabilities, and leveraging the security operations vulnerability response solutions to help address that. And now we're going to turn it over to Gordon, who's going to cover the demo. He'll highlight the inherent risk questionnaire, tiering, showcase the vendor portal, the self-assessment for the vendors, as well as finding management. Gordon?
I'd like to remind everybody that we do have our Q&A panel down here, so please ask questions. Stop Gordon along the way. He loves to be interrupted. So please don't be shy.
Nope, it's all good, for sure. All right, so we are now looking at a portal on ServiceNow. And so we found it helpful for our clients to have basically a one-stop shop for things related to IRM, whether that be their controls and assurance, as well as vendor risk management. And so the vendor risk journey really begins with getting those vendors inside of the platform. And there's a variety of ways that that can be done, but the three most primary are through a back-end one-time data load. You could integrate with the procurement system, or you can enable a request item on the portal. And so we're going to be going through that example today. So in this instance, we're going to be requesting a new vendor engagement. So this is a new service that we're wanting to bring on board to the platform. Once we navigate to that form, we are able to enter in some details regarding that particular service or product that we're looking to onboard and start using. And so this would be the form that the business user is looking to submit when they're requesting an information security review. So they have a vendor that they want to start getting a product from or to engage, and they need to get that approval from information security. This is where they would go in to submit the request. And so for this instance, we're looking at a new HR management system. Our vendor's Acme Inc. We can specify what type of vendor we're looking for, what's the engagement length, what's the start date, end date, some value parameters, who's the business contact, who's the engagement manager, and then just a general description. These forms are configurable. And so one aspect of it, and I think Linda was speaking to it a bit earlier, that Gundersen really wanted in theirs was integration with their project management. And so when someone at Gundersen is requesting a new vendor product or service, they're expected to pick a product or a project ID from that solution inside of ServiceNow. And so you can really start to integrate not only with other areas like project management, but even contract management inside of ServiceNow, so you can get that holistic view of the vendor procurement process and vendor onboarding. Once those vendors are in the platform, we'll come in and you'll have your inventory of vendors. So we went to a list of all the companies. We can kind of see them right here. Each vendor record itself will have a variety of characteristics. We can input information like its industry, what type of services they're providing, its website, as well as some address and contact information, including things like profile. So there's a variety of different characteristics that can be added here. One common one that we'll see added as well is something like business unit or organization unit, just to track which vendors are, or which organizations are leveraging which vendors inside of the environment. We can also assign those business owners and then a vendor manager. So this could be someone from the information security team who's responsible for making sure that this vendor is going through its process and getting its appropriate risk evaluations. Additionally, as we were requesting on the service portal there, a particular software engagement, a company, a vendor overall, can be broken down into a list of engagements. So if you have a larger vendor where you're doing multiple products and services are being procured for them and you're leveraging multiple of their offerings, you can start to segregate those into their own vendor engagements, because the solutions they're providing from a software perspective may be different if they're also doing some like cloud hosting for you as well. There's going to be different security controls in place that you need to consider. And so you can isolate those as well and create your own vendor engagements. With that, from a macro level on the company record in this risk scoring tab, you can start to see how the risk is being rolled up to that macro level vendor. So you can see that picture of, okay, what's my risk of doing business with this vendor overall, as well as on that engagement by engagement basis and seeing where they come into play and various factors. It's also important to note that you can set different statuses and tiers and things for your vendors. So sometimes it might be a tactical supplier, it could be a strategic partner, and based off of the type of vendor, you can establish different scoring parameters and rule sets. So you really have a robust scoring engine and risk analysis engine behind the product as well. So once the vendor is onboarded and once the engagement is present, the next phase in the process would be to launch those tiering assessments. And so at a high level, this tiering assessment is really just establishing the nature and relationship of what this vendor is going to be providing your organization. And so there's a draft phase where you're determining which questionnaires you want to send out to the vendor. You're identifying who's going to be receiving that, which business user. Then that business user themselves, they would receive an assessment to complete. And then you would go from there in terms of determining the tier rating. And so they would get an email with a link to an assessment. In this instance, I'm just navigating to the portal, so they could also visit the portal as well. Usually GRC, My Tiering Assessments, will take you straight to this screen. When they take the assessment, they'll be greeted with the assessment screen. And it's important to note too that this tiering assessment, the questions here can be configured. ServiceNow does come with a basic tiering questionnaire by default, but that can be further tailored to meet your organization's needs, or if you have your own inherent risk questionnaire that you're already leveraging, you could use that as well. But basically, once they submit the questionnaire, they fill out the responses, they navigate through the sections. This tiering assessment will return, and a tiering score will be automatically calculated based off the responses. So inside the questionnaire templates, you can establish the scoring and things, as well as your scales. So if the score comes back between a 40 and a 59, we'll get a moderate. And from that tier level, that really is going to drive the amount of assurance activities that are needed on the back end from the vendor. So if it's a low tier vendor, it's your cafeteria menu system or something like that, you may not need to go with a full-blown SIG full assessment and a bunch of supplemental and document requests. It's a lower risk vendor. Versus if it's something where they're providing a lot of sensitive information, they've got access to your systems or something like that, that would typically result in a higher or more critical tier. And so you can set up assessment templates to be triggered automatically based off of your tiering results. And so once the tiering process is complete, our vendor or our engagement, depending on which level we chose to perform that assessment, will get a tier calculated. And then ServiceNow, if you set up tier-based submission rules, will automatically go ahead and launch an assessment to that vendor. And so we get something like this, where it's an auto-generated security assessment or vendor risk assessment. There's a few different states here across the top. So this draft state, this is where we are basically preparing the vendor risk assessment, and we're establishing which questionnaires and document requests we want to send to them. So we have a SIG full questionnaire here, and ServiceNow has the SIG integration, so it has the SIG Lite, SIG Full, and SIG Core for I think a few different years, as well as you can add your own questionnaires that you may want to send, so supplemental questionnaires. As Linda was referencing earlier, we recently added a system architecture questionnaire that can be sent out to the vendors to really get a sense of the architecture requirements for bringing in that product. Additionally, you can do document requests, whether you want like a SOC 1 or SOC 2 report, information security policy. Maybe for a healthcare organization, you need a HIPAA certification. So you can request those things as well. Once that assessment is submitted to the vendor actually has their own portal where they can then log in and see a summary of all of their things. And so right here for this vendor Acme Inc., we've got 3 different engagements that are being performed. Different people inside of that vendor organization, they can assign out who's responsible for certain engagements or for answering certain questionnaires. They can also have the ability to invite members to their team, so they can manage their team and invite additional contacts as well. So if you only have the account executive as the point of contact, they can log into the portal and then bring in other folks from their organization who have the knowledge to respond to the security questionnaires. From an assessment screen, we're able to see the different requests that have been submitted, so the document requests as well as the questionnaires. Within the questionnaires themselves, you can see the different sections across the left, so they can navigate directly to those sections. And there's a variety of question options. You have attachments, choices. You can even establish question dependencies. So if you answer yes or no to this question, dependent questions will pop up. So there's a full inventory of like 17 different question types, and you can establish those dependencies between the questions. Once those assessments and document requests are submitted, ServiceNow will automatically update the state of the vendor risk assessment to this response as received. And from here, we can see the questionnaires down below, and we have the option to view responses. And so we can click this view responses button. And that'll launch up this interface right here where we're able to look at all of the different questions. We can start to flag certain items for follow-up. We can generate issues. And so from a question by question basis, based off of the response, we can say, okay, we want to include this question when creating an issue. We can have internal notes for our own team. We can add comments to the vendor directly. We can flag it as something we want them to follow up with. And so we can navigate through all of these different sections, reviewing them in isolation. We can filter to those questions we flagged for follow-up. We can filter to only things that answered incorrectly, so they chose the wrong option. We can add notes and comments to the assessment, as well as just adding an overall macro level reviewer comment to the questionnaire. We're able then to either export the responses to Excel. We can create an issue directly from the screen by checking that box. We want to include this question when creating an issue. And we can also return the questionnaire to the vendor for further response. And so those same actions can be performed with the questionnaires and the document requests, and it can occur on an individual by individual basis. So if you only need to send one back to them, you could only send one questionnaire back. If you wanted to send them all, you can do them all, but you would do it on a one-by-one basis as you're reviewing them. Other common enhancements that we'll see is adding users identified as specific reviewers for certain questionnaires. So that's something that we've also added for Gundersen that can be added as well. Once the vendor risk issues are identified, you can have that back and forth through the portal. So I think both Linda and Teresa were referencing that earlier, where you have an issue identified with the vendor and need that interface for working with them regarding that issue. So you have your issue, you've documented the name, a description, you've established a schedule for how soon you want this remediated by. You've got your recommendations. Do you want the vendor to remediate it? Do you need additional information? You've got some explanation details. And you can also associate the question for which the issue was generated. Once this is submitted to the vendor, they're actually able to see it through the portal themselves. So if we go here to this risk assessment right here, we can see all of the issues associated with that risk assessment. And so as the vendor contact, we can log in here directly. We can attach evidence. We can see the description of the issue if it was populated. We can see specifically which question the issue is related to. There's different tasks and things, and we can chat back and forth to the information security team that is working the issue. So you can comment back and forth, and you can see it on both sides. So comment to information security, comment to vendor. You can also, from the vendor or from the information security side, post what are called work notes. So similar to other modules and other tasks in ServiceNow, you can have internal notes that are not visible to that vendor. So they can only be visible to you. And then last but not least, ServiceNow does come with a dashboard out of the box that highlights a lot of the different reports and things that you'll need both from the vendor and engagement level. As with the rest of the platform, users will have the opportunity to create their own dashboards and their own reporting that's specific to them, as well as folks with the publishing roles can push out dashboards and reports, from a program perspective. But with that, we'll turn it back over to the team and answer some questions.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things that you just said, Gordon. One of the things I wanted to point out is when you were adding people and taking people away on the vendor portal, that's actually updating the information in the platform in real time. So you're no longer, as a customer, having to manage your vendor's contacts on your side because you don't know what's happening. That person may have left the company for all you know. But giving that capability to the vendor, you're enabling that information to stay current, which is half the battle, is being able to actually get to somebody in the first place to ask the question. The other thing that I really like, I don't know if you showed it real quick, but when on the customer side, like on Linda's side, being able to see how far the vendor has gotten in answering the questionnaires is really helpful. So when you call up Bob the vendor, and say, how far have you gotten? And they say, oh, I'm almost done. And you can look at that little slider and say, but it's like 5%. How can you be almost done? It's that ability to have that conversation about what's holding it up, how can I help you, all of that. And then just seeing all that consolidated in the vendor portal, I think is just, saves so much time. It's just,
Teresa,
it's
you're so right. Teresa, you're so right, because I can actually go out to that dashboard if someone asks me for the status on a particular contract or security assessment. I don't have to reach out to my team. I can just go to the dashboard, look to see what's the status of that assessment at that time. Another really, I really especially like the reminders and tasks that Gordon talked about, because I have an interesting story that I can share about that. And that is one where we had a vendor completing a security risk assessment. And part of the requirement for that particular vendor was to provide us a copy of their SOC 2 report. They provided us a copy of their SOC 2 report, but it was in Danish. So my team could not read that report. And they responded back and said, we need the report to be submitted to us in English. Well, they didn't have it translated to English yet. That was going to be done sometime in July or August. So we have now a reminder on the portal for not only the vendor, but ourselves to know that we're still waiting on that SOC 2 report. And luckily, I mean, we're not able in that particular instance, we're not approving that contract until we have the report and can read through it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, having that information up front and then not having to put little reminders on your own calendar, having it automatically go out, because let's face it, we're all really busy, is just, it's so helpful. So that's actually a very cool story. I like that story.
Very good. So we're almost wrapping up here. And in terms of what's next on the journey, Linda, I think we had a session earlier in the engagement to really roadmap out what would Gundersen's priorities be, what were some of the interdependencies, and came up with a roadmap. From a framework perspective, if you think about the estate as consisting of corporate governance and oversight, your laws, regulations, policies, all that's pushed down to the business and the supporting operating environments. And then these pillars, risk and compliance, vendor risk, resiliency, security operations, and so forth, they all support the business and those environments in achieving and meeting the corporate governance and oversight objectives. So we've checked the box now on vendor risk management. It's fully operational, and you've also worked to deploy a similar style quick start, Edgile quick start for business continuity to address your resiliency needs. And in terms of the group wanting to know more, both Teresa Law from ServiceNow, as well as Brian Risman from Edgile, would be happy to have follow-up discussions with you. And in terms of
absolutely. Yeah, we've only got a minute or two. I just wanted to kind of circle back around to the concept of, now we've got this wonderful vendor risk management application implemented. It is part of a portfolio. It's built on the platform. So, some of the questions that we've got here about, can you now tie that into compliance or risk? You can define controls against the different questions in the questionnaire and be able to monitor that on a continuous basis and identify risks through the different questions in the questionnaire. You can also scale this to hundreds of vendors. And then I think we're really at the top of the hour. So, the rest of the questions, we'll make sure we get back to you all. We'll have a record of this. But I want to thank Linda, thank David, and thank Gordon so very much for joining us. I think the story of Gundersen Health's journey is fantastic, and I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.